Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm your host. I head up the developer consulting team here at MTM. And welcome to the latest edition of our long-running Byte Club series, where we talk to some of the best and brightest minds in software development. I'm joined today by my guest, Tuule Sõber. Thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, it was great to be here.
As always, we're going to start with just a series of quick-fire questions, spaces or tabs.
Spaces for sure, but I pressed tab for space.
Okay. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a teacher and a dancer and a wizard, Harry Potter. That was the influence. And then a journalist and then a lawyer and then ended up in programming.
Cool. A co-pilot, fad or game changer?
Game changer for sure.
Most irrational fear?
Heights, yeah.
Okay. If you could only have 3 apps on your phone, what would they be?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to say Reddit based on the time that I spend on it. Then the New York Times games. I love word games and puzzles. And then an alarm clock, because it's a practical answer, I guess.
Yeah, cool. VR or AR?
VR.
What book do you own but have never read?
For instance, Guy Gabriel Kay's Tigana, which is a really cool fantasy book. That is the favorite book of my favorite author, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Dark mode or light mode?
Dark mode.
Monolith to microservices, natural evolution or unnecessary complexity?
Depends on the context.
And finally, Vastlakukul, cream jam or marzipan?
Marzipan.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It'd be great just to maybe hear a bit more about your journey. It sounds like you started as a young child with 1,000,001 different paths that you wanted to go down. How did you end up in programming and software development, and how did you get to where you are today?
I'm always been quite a rational person. So when it came time to choose what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study in university, I basically ran down a list of things that had been interesting for me, and then talked to people who were studying it. So like I said, lawyer, for instance, I was big into debating, and so I liked to argue, and a lot of debaters ended up in, as lawyers. And so I spoke to them and they were like, but you also have to care about the law and that interested in that. And I was like, no, I just want to talk. That was fun for me. So I decided not that. Teachers, unfortunately, also in Estonia, where I'm from, they don't make enough money and the working hours are pretty insane. So I decided not to do that. And so I was left with actually either computer science, because I was always into mathematics and sciences, and I was also pretty good at that. And secondly, I was considering international relations, also because of a debating background. And a very shallow reason, but I ended up in computer science just because the university I went to gave you a free laptop and a stipend.
Okay.
And they also knew the job market's probably better compared to, if you were a historian of politics. And that's how I ended up in computer science, yeah.
Very cool. How about the journey within computer science itself? Where would you say your sort of specialism lay, and kind of how did you decide on that? Where has that taken you in the job market?
It's been an interesting journey. So when I studied for 3 years, the course I chose was quite theoretical. So there was a lot of math and stuff like that. And we didn't actually program that much or write code. And since we didn't do it a lot, I was afraid I'm going to be really bad at it. And so my thesis was on business analytics instead. And I was even a little bit too afraid, or imposter syndrome hit hard. So I was a bit afraid to even apply for programmer jobs. Thankfully, I ended up reconnecting with an old friend who suggested I apply to the place where he worked in. And so I did. They gave me a job as a full stack programmer. So that's where I started out at. And, a lot of the job to start with was learning how to write code. But I liked that a lot. So we used Python and React. Did that for a few years, then shifted companies, and whereas my first employer had been a software development agency, time tracking, all that sort of stuff.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, not my favorite, let's say. Then I thought it would be interesting to go work for a product company as an in-house developer instead. So that is what I did next. And yeah, I enjoyed that a whole lot more. And that was actually for a British startup in IoT and climate tech. Did that for a few years. Then the company started to do not that great. Then I basically ended up at my current job. I was hired as a senior developer. I did that for a few years until last summer, where I got the opportunity to switch gears. So our team was expanding. We were hiring more developers, so we needed someone to manage them. And I had always been interested in that. I think my history shows that also in how I've been interested in maybe teaching or, doing some sort of communication-y things. So I took the opportunity, and now I've been an engineering manager for the last almost a year.
Gotcha. And how have you found that shift from IC to management?
It's been very interesting. I think the part of the job that I thought would be my favorite, which is working with people one-on-one, like coaching and mentoring, that is still my favorite part. But sometimes it's interesting to see how the sausage is made, right? So maybe as a programmer, you have the feeling that, all the levels of managers, like, they have their stuff together. They know what they're doing. There's specific plans. There's like strategies, OKRs, whatnot. But then you get into the rooms where the discussions for those things happen, and it can be a lot more chaotic than you think. But thankfully, the people I work with, at least, like, they're still very like data-minded, and I think the decisions they make are interesting. And that's maybe like a bit more the boring answer. The interesting answer, that was the biggest surprise for me, was the role that physical exercise plays in this job.
Okay.
So that's actually really strange. As a manager, you have way more meetings, and I am really happy that I got into the habit of like regularly working out before the career shift, because working out means that, I have a long day of meetings, I'm tired, I'm an introvert, so it's even worse. I go like for a quick run or a lifting session, and I come home energized. Like it gives me so much energy back. Whereas if I like didn't do it, I would just go home and be all like tired and negative. And so that was honestly the biggest surprise for me, is like how much our brains are still like, just a bunch of meat that's trying its best. And moving your body like helps a lot with performing really well at this job that we have.
Was that something that you didn't have, or you didn't feel the need for when you were sort of pre-managerial role? Is that something that's kind of changed?
Yeah, so the nature of the job is different enough that it makes a way bigger of an impact. Like just because like I went from having like 2 meetings a week to over 10. Some days are just back to back for several hours. Now, I know not all manager jobs are like that, and honestly mine is even on like the lighter scale of things. If I've spoken to other managers who have like 7 of their 8 hours every working day are meetings, like I'm not there, and thank God. So yeah, I think like that was the main reason why it's had such a big impact. It's just, you have to speak with a lot of people, and especially for me, so I manage a team of 11 people, which is quite big. And I want to touch base with them. I want to see how they're doing. So I'm going to talk to them. Like I have bi-weekly one-on-ones with my team. So that does, come down to quite a lot of meetings together with everything else. So I would say like that is one thing. The other reason, in addition to just the meeting load, it is the responsibility. With great power and all that. And it is hard to make sure that you're doing the best for your team, the best for yourself. And that can weigh on you. And again, like being maybe in fresh air or in the gym really like helps with that somehow. I don't even know what the mechanism is there. It's probably more hidden. Maybe it's because you get some time to mull things over, or maybe because you get to switch off. And like remind yourself that there's more to life than like, arguing over like a spreadsheet row for the next year's plan.
And Zoom.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything that you particularly miss about your IC days?
I imagine this is a very common answer, but yeah, some focused time for coding. So like properly getting in the flow. The way that the job again is quite different is that instead of a big thing to do, like say every week, you have maybe like 20 to 40 different tiny things to do every week. So there's a lot of context switching. It's harder to sit down and focus, but that is something that I'm actively trying to get better at. I was recently speaking to a mentor of mine, and he said that he tries to do a thing on most days where he even switches like his laptop off, doesn't have his phone, and has like 60 to 90 minutes of just like quiet, focused time. And he has agreed with himself that there's no outcome expected out of these sessions. He just, sees what is on his mind, where his thoughts take him, like what maybe actions he can think of. And that is something I want to try. So yeah, that's something where I want to steer my days toward, to have more of this focus time. Because right now, there can be a lot of switching around.
In terms of that kind of, I suppose, mentorship that you're kind of seeing for yourself, and what other, tools or resources have been helpful in terms of kind of being a better manager, or kind of, you know, understanding what the role's about and how you can make that work?
So in addition to the physical exercise I already talked about, mentoring is another big one. So I got to a place where I actually had a really good relationship with two mentors, like before I made the switch. And one of them had made the switch as well. So he had been a programmer. He has actually a degree in philosophy, which is even adds like an extra dimension to our conversations. That's awesome. So I built that relationship beforehand with a couple of people, and that really helped. I think if I were to now start again or do something like this again, if I didn't have already like someone who's knowledgeable in the new job, I would first find them before I even make any types of switch. Because building that relationship in addition to learning the ropes can be really hard. So I would say that is definitely like the second really important thing in your toolbox. A side note under this point is maybe you want a similar relationship with your manager. It doesn't have to be like a full-on mentoring or coaching role or whatever, but you have to be on good terms with them, and they have to believe in you as a potential manager. And, you know, you just have to have good rapport. So that definitely helps. Other things in my toolbox, just trying a lot of things that work, like that focus time that I mentioned. That's something I want to try. Sometimes I want to try turning off Slack more, especially during meetings. I'm terrible in, doing several things at the same time. So yeah, just like talking to people, finding out various bits and bobs that might be useful. That really helps.
And how do you take that and try and bring that to your relationship with, you know, you mentioned you've got a team of 11, you know, how does that, maybe the teaching element come into it? How does the mentoring element come into that? Like, how do you then try and kind of establish that relationship with those on your team?
I wish I had a good answer. It really depends on the person. Like some people are more interested in like self-development, and they come into the conversations with their own plans. They come in, they're like, oh, I'm improving this and this, and in 5 years I want to maybe also be a manager. So I talk with them like, cool, how can we get you there? Like, what specific skills do we need to work on? And some people, on the other hand, they're like, oh, it's a job. I'm here to do the job. And that is totally fine too. I think it's an interesting age where we treat everything like a hustle culture type of thing. Like it's, oh, you have to be the best that you can ever be. And then we forget that it's just work at the end of the day. Like it can be whatever that person wants it to be for themselves. So yeah, it's a lot of talking to people, finding out what they want, and then finding like the ways in which these conversations happen the best. So with some people, our one-on-ones actually maybe happen over lunch because that's where we both feel most comfortable. With some people, we grab some coffee, go out for a walk. With some people, we keep very like meticulous notes, and with some people, it's more like what is the vibe this week?
You mentioned at the start that there was maybe you had a bit of kind of imposter syndrome at the start of the career. Did that reemerge as you then kind of took this shift to management, or were you kind of comfortable in the environment at this stage and it felt like an easier switch?
Very astute. It definitely reemerged, but a bit differently. When I was starting out as a programmer, it was more like, I don't know how to write code. Like I'm lacking this very specific technical skill. Whereas, I've always been quite comfortable with communicating to people, making plans, analyzing things. So like that part of the job, I wouldn't say I had it quite nailed down as a 21-year-old that was straight out of university, but I didn't worry about that part of the job. As a manager, it hasn't been like that big of an imposter syndrome feeling. Like I don't feel like I don't know how to do the job at all, or I'm lacking something really basic. Instead, it raises its quite ugly head at like very specific situations of, for instance, I'm not very good at strategical thinking. And that's something, I've been talking about with my manager too. Like I feel like I'm more of this thing is grabbing our attention right now. We should focus on this. Let's do maybe this thing next. I'm not that good at thinking about like, cool, where do we want to see the team, the department, the company in a year or in 2 years? So in areas like this, it comes as a surprise then sometimes like, this thing, I don't know anything about this thing. How do you strategy? What is strategy? So it's been more of like surprising at times of where it can really feel like I don't know what I'm doing.
One of the other shifts that you mentioned in your intro was the kind of the move from agency to in-house. I'd love just to hear a bit more about that. And I mean, you mentioned timesheets as the bane of my existence as well, but what are some of the other kind of changes that you noticed as you made that switch?
You care about the product a lot more. And I think that is the main reason why I wouldn't go back to an agency format, like unless there was some other circumstances that merited it. But I want to care about what I do, and I want the teams that I work with to also care about what they do. And that is a lot easier if you're working like together on a single project or a product. You're working like all towards the same goal. And it definitely helps that with a lot of like in-house developers, you have additional incentives to care, like maybe you get your stock options or something like that. That makes it really easy to get everyone like on the same page. So yeah, I would say that is like the main thing that I really enjoy about working like in-house rather than in an agency format.
Gotcha. Is there anything you miss about the agency? Maybe that had a bit more of that hustle culture, which you're keen to avoid, or...
I did like the variety. Now, it was a small agency, so it wasn't rare to work on like, 10 projects in a single week. Like that could be quite a lot, but also, like I said, by nature, I'm quite big of a multitasker anyway. So being able to switch between things, it tickles that novelty part of your brain that us humans like so much, when you're scrolling on Reddit or Instagram or something. So I like that part I did kind of like, because you felt like, oh, I'm spinning many plates. I'm being useful in many different ways, I guess. That's what it burns down to. So yeah, I did also enjoy that part.
Nice. I was doing my research before this meeting, was on your LinkedIn. I noticed that you worked for a startup as well that then got acquired. How does that shift work? What were some of the changes that you noticed there between kind of working in a startup environment to then working for a sort of a larger organization?
So I worked at like this startup company for a year before it got acquired. And now it's been a bit over a year since the acquisition. Now we've been part of Zendesk. Before, the startup was maybe like 100 people, more or less, and Zendesk has like 6,000 plus people. And I'm actually quite grateful that, at least from the perspective of like an IC, it was gradual. Like, yes, some things happened like quickly, but I think a lot of it was like, oh, like next month we're maybe changing over your HR software, or, first thing you get is access to Slack. So instead of being like, oh, you have to immediately stop using all of your old tools and processes and like start using all of ours, we were given like more leeway and more time to adapt.
Okay.
And I really appreciate that. On the other hand, the things that we're now moving over to are definitely processes and tools that are maybe a bit clunkier to use, that are maybe a bit slower or more annoying, like there's more checks in place. Which, makes sense. Like, for instance, our product before supported like 2 languages, maybe 2.5 if you're being generous. But now Zendesk, they have to serve their clients in like over 20 different languages. And in order to make sure that the whole thing like works smoothly in all of these different localization and internationalization formats, you have to have a lot more like checkpoints in place. Which does bring with it like some more slowness, some more processes. This is kind of like a natural thing you just have to do, especially like as a big company with that many clients. So yeah, that has been maybe a bit more of the annoying parts, is getting used to that. But what has been also nice is that they haven't mandated that we, rewrite everything in like React. So right now our front end is in Vue.js. All the rest of the code bases are in React. Now, our leadership has enough technical understanding to understand that would be a huge undertaking that's maybe not worth that much in the end. But sometimes we do think about it, because what you would get with it would be benefits of like unified visual style and language. Like otherwise you just have to duplicate the same thing. So, but there have all been like quite rational conversations, and that's something they do appreciate.
Yeah. How did you decide on Vue, your previous place?
I actually joined after that decision. Right. From what I hear in the company lore is there was one person that was like, oh, I love this. This looks fun. That was the reason.
So often the way, isn't it?
Yes.
A question that I feel like I've never had a good answer to is, how does a piece of tooling or technology like reach escape velocity or something? And the kind of the world of front-end frameworks, I feel like, is a really nice place for this, because like you've kind of got this dominant framework in React. You've got a couple of other, I guess, like tier 2 players like Angular, like Vue. But it seems like every other week there's a kind of a new one that bubbles up. And it's like, well, what is it about Vue that helped it kind of reach escape velocity or whatever. Like, what is it about, I don't know, Svelte or something that kind of keeps it, maybe like everyone loves the idea of it, but it's just still hasn't quite kind of broken through yet. Or maybe I'm just not close enough to the world to know the answer to that.
I think if you have at least 2 fanatics that have opened like forum posts on Hacker News, then
Okay.
I think with every such project, if you have like enough, like maybe early adopters or for whom they find a hook for themselves, why it's really interesting. Like Svelte's approach is quite unique, I think. And then, some people are like, oh, that's cool, I want to use that more. But otherwise, pure luck, probably, and just random chance.
Yeah. It's strange how that always plays a role.
Yeah.
I guess maybe coming back then to this idea of, acquisition. I mean, you talked a bit about kind of more check processes in place.
It has definitely like affected the developer experience as well. For instance, for the localization that I mentioned, we now have like automated things in place, like in the pipeline that maybe fetch new translations or generate the necessary things. We have to get like extra approvals from the specific localization team if we do make any changes to that stuff. So they can be like, oh, actually, we wouldn't end this sentence with a period because that is part of like the way we do things. So that has been one thing, obviously mostly affecting front-end developers. Other things that we have gotten, it has been, we're now definitely, I would say, more security-minded, or like it reaches the developers more. So we have a bounty program in place. They actually find legitimate issues. So we now have like developers regularly come in, they have to fix the things that we find, which hopefully then means in the future you're also thinking more about, oh, did the new endpoint I just write, like, is it checking for the necessary permissions? So those things have also been changing. Like there's a tiny bit more like of various things that we have to think about. It's a bit harder to just, write the code, push it out, hope for the best. Yeah, but otherwise, I wouldn't say there's much, like we don't have any new mandated like linters or something like that. Like that's, we still use like whatever tools we think is best. Another interesting thing that has actually changed regarding developer experience has been AI. So Zendesk has also very much embraced it, and also interestingly, in the realm of its own in-house developers. So they have, there's trainings, there's access to everything. And that was actually like a nice positive surprise when the acquisition first happened. It was like, oh, but they also like, we get to use GitHub Copilot, for instance. There's a in-house ChatGPT instance that we can use for our work. And I think that has been really nice for a developer, or because I could also totally see a big company as an employer that's like, oh no, we are not using any of these things. They're like maybe too big, too new, too scary. Now you have to keep writing code the way that you always have, which is just copy from Stack Overflow and change it a little bit.
Yeah. Coming back to AI, it feels like every conversation in the world of software development and engineering has to talk about it at some stage. How has it changed your role, first as an IC, second as a manager?
I think the impact has been way more obvious as an IC. So Copilot has meant that I don't have to like remember the details of the syntax of a language anymore, which has made me like a lot smarter and faster in one ways and a lot dumber in other ways. So because like I don't have to remember the details anymore, I get to maybe move a bit faster. I get to think more about the bigger picture and spend more time on writing tests. But on the other hand, sometimes then I'm way slower when I stare at a line of code and I'm like, how did you initialize a list in Golang again? So, and like the impact there has been more obvious. In addition to that, using ChatGPT for debugging maybe, or for writing things from scratch. For instance, the SQL queries, I've always, like that's been my weak side. And so getting to describe my problem to something that spits out like the first proper working draft, or usually not working, but something that has been really helpful. So like it does help like balance out my weak sides more. And I definitely use it daily. Whenever I code, always something is running, like Copilot mostly. As a manager, there's been way less of an impact, because I think it is like you work with people at the end of the day, and that's not something I'm willing to delegate to LLMs. It's like having conversations with actual human beings that I maybe am responsible for or that I need to work together with. So there I have used like ChatGPT maybe for when I have to like write the first draft of a letter or something like that, like a very specific tiny thing. But overall, I find it way more useful to speak actually to my peers For instance, if I have a hairy situation or something where I don't know what to do, I find that their advice is usually more valuable and more human. Especially, I think, because it depends a lot on your working culture. GPTs can be super duper hyper positive at times. Our European working culture is not always hyper positive. I have people who are very honest, we're very direct, and that also has to fit into the way I communicate with everyone that I work with. That's useful for my job as a manager.
On that IC side, then, it feels like there's this kind of interesting conversation at the moment about tools like Copilot, like ChatGPT. There's one version of the future where they're used to enhance the role of a software developer, and then there's the other version of the future, which is they replace the software developer. Where do you see that, and how have your experiences to date kind of shaped you in one direction or the other, or is it the inevitable, a bit of both?
Yeah, it's always going to be a bit of both. It depends. I used to be very skeptical about that it could ever fully replace us, especially, working with these tools every day. So it was hard for me to see that. Actually, until recently, when by Hacker News and other places, a few pull requests went viral where I think .NET developers used an LLM to write PRs from scratch. And the way it would work, a human would then give the review. And the LLM would then make changes based on the review and try to get to a functioning code. But, they didn't. And the conversations were very frustrating between machine and human. And people made a lot of fun for them, over them for it. But for me, that was a bit of a moment where my mind was blown because, this is how it's going to work. This is how they could actually replace actual programmers. So I see now. But I very much hesitate to make any kind of prediction on this. I have learned that my intuition when it comes to AI and how it affects society is really off. So I'm more excited to wait and see. I think for humans that have some other cool skills or enjoy doing other things, like communication, those types of skills will always be valuable and you'll always have something to do.
It's really interesting. In order to have that sort of conversation with an AI, you do still need to know quite a lot about how software development works and best principles, best practices, and etc. As a manager now, how do you look to kind of build up that knowledge in juniors in your team who are learning how to code with Copilot by their side, with ChatGPT by their side? How does that work for you?
I hesitate to make any kinds of prescriptions of what you can use and what you can't use for work. I think everyone learns in a different way. Some people might find it a lot easier to rely heavily on other tools. Some people would rather really go deep into the guts of a system or thing and do it themselves before they're comfortable relying on LLMs or other AI tools. So yeah, I wouldn't mandate anything. I think it really depends on the person. But I also I would definitely see the potential problems with that too, right? One who might never learn maybe the best practices of a specific technology or tool might end up, writing worse code. But I think that's somewhere where we can rely on our teammates, right? To make sure that, can you actually read this code? And if you can, and it's maintainable and it's tested, I don't think it matters too much. Does it look a certain way, or is it the way that we have always written Java? I don't think that matters at the end of the day.
So peer reviews here for the long time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you can automate a lot of that, with linting and testing and so on. But as long as there's even, I would say, a single human in the whole software development process, you should have humans looking at the work of other humans or machines to give it, their seal of approval.
Gotcha. So 18-year-olds of the world should still study computer science, and there are still going to be jobs for you when you graduate in 3 years' time.
Oh, that sounds like a very big, important promise. I don't know. There's definitely going to be something for you to do. So I think you should always study and do what you find most interesting.
Well, on that note, I think we will call it a day. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really great to meet you. And please take your Byte Club mug home with you as a symbol of our eternal thanks and gratitude.
Thank you.